This is Dean Smith from the Community of Human and Organizational Learning, and I am just letting people in from the waiting room. So this is my slow roll to make sure that we have everybody before we get started. And it looks like we do have people in from the waiting room. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to join Rob Fisher. Rob, so I'll turn it over to you in a moment, but Rob, it's great to see you. I know your history with this community predates when I became involved. So I have a huge appreciation for your expertise and your willingness to share your insights with everybody today, and also at our upcoming conference. So, I know people will be listening to, those insights that they'll be able to pick up not only today, but at the conference. And as another interesting side note that I've just learned, Rob's the recording of Rob's first webinar with us is still the most highly watched on our YouTube channel. So Rob, apparently you share a lot of great stuff. So with that, Rob, I'm thrilled that you have us here, that you are taking the time to spend with us today, and it's all yours.
All right, I appreciate that, Dean. I saw my sister from another mother come in, Pat Fisher, as we just go way back. So howdy, Pat. Well, hello, everybody. Again, my name's Rob Fisher. For those of you who don't know me, I see a whole bunch of familiar names in there, but I just want to spend a little time talking about the difference between something being developed and something being demanded. My keynote is going to be about psychological safety being developed, not demanded. In other words, how do we approach psychological safety in a way that it is created sustainably instead of it's the next shiny object that we go after, like we've done so many things in the past. So this is just to give you a little peek in the pale, because we're doing 3 or 4 different sessions. And so they asked me if I'd kind of preview those sessions. So I've thrown a lot in here. It will be recorded, but also I'll provide Jessica with a PDF so that if you want to take the PDF version and highlight some things that you may want to ask questions about when we get to the conference, then you can do that. I encourage you to ask questions along the way. Dean is going to magically manage those questions by saying, is this a question pertinent to what we're doing right this second? And we can ask it, and he'll just say, hey, Rob, we've got a question. We'll say, okay, great. You'll type back. We'll ask that question in the Q&A period near the end. So if Dean wouldn't mind doing that.
You got it.
Everybody pretty much knows my background. I don't like to spend a lot of time on that. But the thing is, we've been doing this for well over 30 years now. And it doesn't matter whether you call it HOP or HPI or advanced error reduction or HP or human factors. The thing that doesn't change is that we're dealing with human success and failure and organizational success and failure. So we have to sometimes remember that that is our standard. That's what we're working to, not that, here's this new thing we need to try and go out and manage. I mean, a lot of people shifted. And they actually say that old hop isn't real hop, only new hop is real hop. And that's just kind of ridiculous, because that's like saying old humans aren't real humans, only new humans are real humans. And we're all just humans. So just a little bit about our history. We have been doing this a long time. We've done it in about 40 countries in 12 languages. We have now well over 100 what we call super advocates. That's consultant level people embedded in organizations. But more importantly, we've trained over 400,000 people around the globe. And we've got about 1.6 million data points on how our personalities impact our performance. So I hope you'll just listen for some nuggets. And I know you'll see this slide again in Norfolk or Portsmouth, but it also wants you to understand that there's a whole realm of people out there that you ought to be using to make sure that you're kind of doing the right thing and don't go down the wrong path. So what's the difference between something being developed and something being demanded? Now, we don't like to think we're demanding things, but when we develop something, we talk a lot about the hows. When we demand something, we're told what to do. It's typically outcome based. There's some accountability applied at the organizational and individual level to the outcomes. And again, we run around all over the place and say safety isn't the absence of problems. It's the creation of controls, and then we go hold people accountable for outcomes. So the workers are typically expected to make things happen, but the leaders are the ones that gain the major benefits from these things that we demand workers to do. When we develop something, the process becomes important. In other words, developed, we take the time to ensure that the process for getting to A to B includes how we're going to develop the accountability through the use of processes, and that leaders then can drive those sustainable improvements. So that leader knowledge, language, and behavior really matter. So the 5 critical areas that matters are something kind of new to HOP, and that's personality diversity. So if we're talking about being developed, not demanded, then if Dean and I have different personality tendencies and needs and different strengths and potential limiters, how is that not coming into play in our development of psychological safety from a sustainable perspective? We also need to understand that you can reduce errors, you can minimize their probability, and you can mitigate their consequence. But we need to focus on all 3 of those things. So this is really error management more than error reduction. But how do we manage the understanding of those critical attributes? Then we have to say that we write stuff down. In our organizations, you're not going to get away from writing things down. This whole trust the worker, that's great. You're still going to write things down. You're still going to have people come in and do audits, whether they're financial audits or safety audits or performance audits. So we need effective written guidance, and that effective written guidance needs to be a critical area of understanding so that we can really use what we've learned over the years and wrap that up and really tie all of these things together through leader engagement. So these critical attributes are strategically connected because typically they are disconnected in our brains and in what we do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these critical areas and kind of see where we go, because that's what develops psychological safety. Psychological safety is what is the result of managing these critical attributes of performance in our organization. So let's talk about personality diversity first. So the personality diversity piece, we're going to do a Monday session, I think it's Monday, pre-session on incorporating personality diversity, advanced error reduction in organizations. So you've got people in your organization that are fiery, or maybe some people that are down to earth or cool and calm as water. You've got people in your organization that are squirrel. Maybe you've got a kid that has trouble focusing. Well, these elements we've known about for about 3,000 years. I mean, the ancient Asian cultures were using the understanding of these, and the fact that we have diverse personalities, and those diverse personalities, now we know, drive us to see and manage risk differently. But what we've learned about that in the last 100 years is more powerful than what we've learned over the last 1,000 previous generations. So as we grow in what we learn, we need to make sure that that is incorporated into what we're doing in this thing that we call human and organizational performance, which then becomes the enabler for this thing that we're calling our next shiny object, psychological safety. So when we talk about personality diversity, we use the kind of simplified version of Dr. Young's work in the 1920s, doer, socializer, thinker, and relator. But we've also partnered up with Equilibrium. So if you've got a cell phone, that QR code should work. And you can go there, take your personality diversity indicator, see that it does represent you, and then start looking at your strengths and potential limiters. And I kind of gave you a code there, fit special basic. You use that and you'll get the basic report of how I can see myself, self-awareness related to personality diversity. But if you've got a small team and you want your team to do it, have them do the same thing, and then have a discussion about the variabilities of our personality and how we see things. Make those topics of conversation, because I tell you, if you don't incorporate personality diversity, you can't be creating psychological safety. You just can't, because it would mean I'm approaching Dean or Jessica or Pat or Ray in a way that they don't need to be or want to be approached. And then the outcome of us having psychological safety isn't there. We just have the perception of that outcome. I feel like I'm yelling at everybody. I'm sorry, I'm yelling at everyone. But so we use Equilibria's e-colors, top e-color red, yellow, green, and blue as the basis for that, because they've got 1.6 million data points on how that impacts the way we see and manage risk. So one of the things that that tells us that is, again, going to be a part and parcel of our session on Monday, that Ray, whether he knows it or not, is going to be helping me with, is see how these things get announced? Are our strengths. These are the things that we bring to the table that we think are why we're chosen for stuff. And they're pretty obvious. But we also have potential limiters. And the reason why we call them potential limiters instead of, in other personality diversity things, they're called weaknesses. But the problem is, if you call it a weakness, each of the 4 personalities treat a weakness differently. So somebody, if you call it a weakness, may say, weakness, you're describing a strength. Or somebody may say, a weakness, oh, poo, if I'm weak in that area, there's nothing I can do about it. So each of the different personalities approaches that differently. But when you have a potential limiters can be managed. So we can teach people how to be aware of and recognize their potential limiters so that they can manage those. And believe it or not, those potential limiters may actually be a strength taken to the extreme. So somebody may be an achiever and competitive and independent, but that may come across as domineering, pushy, or impatient. So being aware of and managing these personality tendencies becomes important. And we're going to talk about the impact of personalities on performance in that Monday 1 to 5 session. It's going to be an immersive session. Some of you guys have been to that before, and what we hear got quite a lot out of it. But you're going to get your advanced personality profile out of that, and something that you can actually take away and take home with you and start having conversations and really making change within your organization and within your family and within the people that you deal with when you leave or even throughout the rest of the conference. This has been a pretty popular session, so we appreciate the Cohort asking us if we would do that this year as well. So the second one is on error reduction or error management. And the reason why this is a critical attribute is, you hear people say, error is the least thing we need to worry about. Well, maybe that's true, but your entire quality standards is based on error reduction and mitigation. So we might as well figure out that error mitigation or error reduction or error propagation are things that we need to understand. And in order to do that, we need very strict and specific definitions that we then follow. So the understanding of the difference between an error and an event and how those things are different becomes vital to managing error. If I don't understand that, I'm not managing it at all. The understanding that a deviation may be us outside the rule, but a violation is we're outside with conscious intent. And we need to manage that and influence it differently than we would influence an error or the event itself. So understanding that errors and violations are different things, need to be treated differently, and that we've got 2 different types of errors that we're trying to manage. The active error, pointing into the stick, turn wrong, switch wrong, thing happens, open wrong valve, stuff goes to wrong place, run stop sign, get hit by truck. Those are almost immediate cause and effect relationships. We also have latent errors or latent conditions. And those elements that are created at one time and reveal themselves at another, we can teach our folks at all levels of the organization to see those coming, to be predictive about when that might impact us. But we can't do that if we don't understand what an error is. And in the end, if leaders don't understand errors, if they're not using the definitions, if they're not playing with the science basis of these things every day, it's really hard to get the workforce to believe that HOP is trying to help them. HOP just becomes this new thing that somebody's trying to do, that then in the end, the first time that the leader sees something, they say, well, even though I know the percentages are 90-10, that one's a violation because I just know it is. So that whole element of leader knowledge, language, and behaviors becomes the driving attribute of change to employ the HOP concepts as the enablers for psychological safety. The creation or the institution of not just telling people that systems drive behaviors and context drives behaviors, but giving them of the system that drives the context and behavior, giving them a tool that they can use every day that says, look, this is an interdependent system where people have to be aware of and manage those personality tendencies when they are managing these attributes of people, programs, processes, work environment, organization, equipment. Is it reasonable to believe, and that's a great question to ask people, that our individual drivers may be seen and felt differently based on our personality tendencies? In other words, you've got somebody that's a real hard shell person, and they're really hard to get to. They're not going to show you that an individual driver is impacting them unless you teach them how to manage those tendencies. And then you've got some people that every single element, they just flood you with their problems. And those may actually overwhelm their ability to see the people, programs, processes, work environment, organization, equipment. So we have to teach people that these individual drivers may be seen and felt differently based on our personality tendencies. And the systemic drivers may be easier to see for some personalities than others. So people say I'm a people person. They say, and I may even talk about this at some time during a co-op meeting. I don't know if I ever said it before in those meetings, but people think that I'm an extrovert and that I was the class clown. You know, they think I was the guy that would run naked across the football field at halftime, back when you could do things like that and not get thrown in jail for a decade. I was not that person. I was probably the guy that talked them into it, but so I was never the extrovert. But I know that that people are a thing that I tend to see first. But I know people around me, equipment and processes are what they see first. So how is it we're not talking about those things that the individual with different personalities see and manage risk differently? Now, here's what I know about the people on this webinar. There's a word misspelled on this page, and two of the major personality types caught it immediately. And somebody wants to type it in the chat. But you don't know whether I misspelled it intentionally, because I know there's people on this that the spelling may be even more important than the content and the context of what we're doing. So just so you know, I've misspelled a couple of things in here to make a point, and now I've got to go back and spell them right. Did that work? Do you think they bought it, Dean? Just shake your head yes or no. Okay, I think they bought it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And my question is, which personality types? Because I would have immediately associated myself with one, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, so that's the great piece. Because these personality, and I'll actually go back on this. But I don't know which one at any given moment is revealing itself, because we've got all four of them in it. So myself, I'm this mix of all four that's, 1% off. So rather than talk about which one is it, we talk about which one may be influencing you in that moment, in the role that you happen to be in on this task at this time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So very often people ask that question. And on the one hand, it's a great question. On the other hand, it's not a question that has a fixed answer. It's a question that has an answer in the moment. So in your role right now, you may be saying, oh, I need to be managing this and make sure people get all the things out of it. So I'm really pulling that green part of my brain out. But normally you would say, oh, I can let that slide by. So does that make sense, Dean? That's a great question. So the performance modes, which you've heard me talk about a lot, the book that I wrote, Understanding Mental Models, has been quite a little hit. And I was just talking to somebody today that came up to me after my presentation. He says, I read your book and then I read it again. And he gave me this compliment. I'm not tooting my own horn, but it's a compliment that is the way I wanted to write the book. And that is, I want people to hear me talking when they're reading instead of trying to see all of the science and theory behind things. So if we don't teach people knowledge-based performance mode right, look, I don't give a crap if you understand skill-based performance mode. It's the error rate's 1 in 1,000. What are you going to do? Bump it up by 10%? Okay, that's great, but that's not our biggest problem. I want us to understand when somebody enters knowledge-based performance mode, their error rate's as high as 50%. 2 of the 4 major personality types, if they see 90%, they'll say, well, that means a 10% error rate. I'm doing it. And 2 of the 4 personality types will say, well, heck, I'm not doing that if it's a 50% error rate. So these things matter in how they're taught. They need to be part and parcel of this error management strategy. But with these error drivers, these traps, people need to be taught, here's what they look like, here's what they feel like, here's what they can do about it. And those are all part and parcel of error management. I've just watched so many organizations count error traps. And I think, to what end? That's like counting performance modes. So, well, I don't need to count them. I need to understand what drives us, what puts us there. And you notice these first 3, stress, multitasking, high workload, time pressure, they all feel the same to us, and they may be internally or externally driven because these are individual drivers. These next 4 either put you in or keep you in knowledge-based performance mode. So is it reasonable to believe that different people with different personality tendencies see and feel and set those traps differently for different people? That's a discussion we need to have. So if we're going to do this thing about starting work when safe, okay, I get it, but we've got to understand what the parameters of that safety are related to how Dean and I may see and manage risk differently. That's a conversation worth having. That's a management of errors that is worth doing. And then to give people the tools becomes important because you've got the traps. Those tell us when we're vulnerable, or those are the vulnerabilities. You've got the triggers that tell people when we're vulnerable. They establish that vulnerability, and then you've got to give them tools. Now, again, there's a whole bunch of people out there that say, well, you don't need to give people tools. And I'm going to say some things that have conflict. I think the last couple of years, Charles has have given me this kind of carte blanche to talk a little bit about things that have been whispered in the hallway in the past. But if you're not giving people error reduction tools, you are robbing them of being the best final barrier they can be. And then you can put a period or an exclamation point at the end of that. Doesn't have to be drastic, doesn't have to be 13 or 14. The individuals only need about 3 to really get over the hump. And they need to understand when to use those. And then the leaders need to be given tools, because if we don't give the leaders tools and processes and models, then the workers aren't going to use new tools and processes and models. But again, this is our experience in 400 deployments of this crap around the world. And that is, if you give the leaders the models, processes, and tools, their knowledge, language, and behaviors, it goes like gangbusters. And if you don't, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, you're still going to be wondering why it's not working. Why isn't HOP working here the way it's working other people? So my first conflict alert that I'll be talking about is that these people that don't think workers need tools, they apparently don't know why the tools work and what they do. So it's easy to say, you don't need to give the workers tools. The workers are the last ones to need tools. Baloney. That would be like saying workers won't go find pry bars if you don't give them the right tool. If you don't give them the right tool, they'll go get a pry bar. And then something will happen. In other words, we should just trust that the workers are going to do the right thing. No. We've got too much water under the learning bridge to just trust. I'm not saying don't trust the workers. I'm saying give them the tools to be successful. tools make the right thing easy to do and the wrong thing hard to do. And there's a lot of people out there that are just saying tools are bad. They're not bad. Trust it from some people that have been out there doing this for 30 years. I believe, this is Rob talking, it is almost unethical to keep tools out of the workforce, but it is just as unethical to teach them bad. So if you don't teach them right, if you don't give them the enablers, then the tools don't work the way you want them to, and then people say tools are bad. So the next one is effective written guidance. And effective written guidance becomes important because we write stuff down. In our organizations, we ain't going to start writing stuff down till the current generation that's coming in is leaving like we are. We're still going to be writing stuff down in one form or another. And, you know, some of you have converted to, well, I'll just let Chat GPT write it down. Well, I hope it's right. I hope, I mean, they won't let Wikipedia write your term paper for you, but they'll let Chat GPT. I don't get it. We need people that understand, here's the top error drivers in written guidance. And here's how we identify them if we're the workforce or the engineer or the subject matter expert. And here's how we write around them or write better for them if we're the person writing the procedure, developing the written guidance. So we have to know what the top 5 error drivers are. You know, field decisions, difficulty, vague or misleading guidance, conflicting informations. We're going to discuss over the week these attributes that actually drive errors in the field, that if we've got people that create effective written guidance, they minimize these things. Just the easy one on field decisions put somebody, so if applicable, when applicable, if needed, when needed, if appropriate, as appropriate, if desired, if required. Those field decisions put people in knowledge-based performance mode. The knowledge-based performance mode error rate is 10 to 50%. The error rate we need to teach that performance mode is 50%. So if I reduce field decisions, I've reduced field error rate. I've reduced probability. I've learned how I can mitigate the consequences of an error. So how we write things down becomes important. In Conflict Alert 2, we still need well-written procedures. They have to be usable. They've got to be able to be available, workable, intelligible, correct, and consistently reinforced. We write things down in industry, and just trusting the workforce doesn't mean taking away their written guidance. It means involving them in the development of effective written guidance. So instead of saying things like, we just need to trust the workforce, we need to say, here's how you show that you trust the workforce by having them help us develop the guidance that then provides the sustainability. Consistency of outcome requires consistency of method. If I allow variability of method, I'm allowing variability of outcome. The next one is effective learning, and we're seeing a whole lot more. And nowadays, you see a whole lot of people characterizing HOP as learning. Learning is a big thing in HOP. In human and organizational performance, learning is a big thing, but it's a process as well. So when we talk about effective learning, we hear about learning teams, and what you may not know is that we were doing facilitated improvement teams probably 15 years before learning teams came along, same concept. But when we do these things like a pre-learning, then you may have heard of the 4 Ds, but we've kind of separated things a little bit differently in that if you pay attention to personalities, then you have to ask the 4 Ds in the right order. If I ask a more, I don't know, a more subdued personality about something being dangerous, then that's my lead. They've got to work up to that. Have the discussion about things that are dumb, things that are different, things that are difficult, things that are dangerous, and do that on pre-task learnings and good catches. But then when we move over to something has happened, shift to Ted's questions. Tell me, explain to me, describe to me, and show me. That's important because now we're playing to all 4 personality types in the way we want them to give us information. So we can use learning teams for all of this, but the way we frame our questions needs to be related to the way we want people to engage with us to get the best information we can. And then we've got to teach leaders how to engage. We can't just tell them that. We can't let them think that the old observation programs were how they need to engage. It's how do we get leaders to engage and give them the tools that they can use to engage. So many of you have seen our gear model for leadership. That's where we convert the momentum of leader knowledge, language, and behaviors into the workforce language and behavior changes that we want through engagement and feedback. And the understanding of that the tightness of that belt matters, that if we can teach the leaders, here's what you need to know and here's what you need to do. But when you go out there, here's how you need to talk about that. Here's the challenges that you have. And if you notice on the previous slide, if you teach them the 4 Ds and you teach them TEDs, they can then go out and engage without the threat of them challenging how people are doing work, as opposed to engaging on how do we create these better outcomes, safe, stable, reliable performance, the new culture, values, and norms that we want to create. Those are outputs from managing this, from helping leaders drive the improvement, to helping leaders drive operational excellence. That focus is the initial focus. And here's where, frankly, some places have gotten it wrong. They think this is where all the focus ought to be. That's why the workforce doesn't get educated in 5 years. They do see change, but you don't see the self-protection capability of the workforce if you don't give them, if you don't enable them to use those tools. We're going to talk a little bit about the essential leadership cycle. The essential leadership cycle has 2 major components. It starts with self and team awareness, goes to then shared vision and values and clear roles and processes. Those are actually the driving elements. But those then create trust and diversity and inclusion and commitment, accountability. Those driving elements create the resultant conditions. But what most organizations don't realize is my problems arise in the resultant conditions, and I try to fix them by fixing the resultant condition instead of going back to the driving element, the thing that made it happen instead of the things that let it happen. So we've introduced things called values-based engagements, and this has been quite the hit because now that leader that didn't like going out and doing an observation in the first place because they're uncomfortable being the person that's watching over someone's shoulder. That's not what we're asking you to do. We're not asking you to watch over someone. Yes, you are. You're asking me to go out and engage with somebody during a task. You got plenty of people observing work. You got plenty of people doing method-based observations of how work is done. But your leaders ought to be doing values-based engagement. Why do we do what we do? Mostly big picture. Tell me about how our safety engagements improve our work. Explain to me what it means for safety to be number 1. Describe to me how our leaders engage on safety. Show me a place where are TED's questions. And we need leaders to have tools to perform those engagements because they're not out there to collect data. Michelle Miller, great leader in Baltimore Gas and Electric, says the more you engage, the more you uncover cultural and values gaps. You fix those, you fix all the things that come out of them. You fix those methods, and it's like method. Now I look at the 1,000, I try to figure out what the values things. We have a utility client that the CEO of this utility has stated he learned more in the first 6 weeks of values-based engagements from his vice presidents than in the first 6 years he was the CEO. It's about, we hear, ask the right questions. Why don't we tell people what the daggum right questions are to ask? How do you perform these? And then they become comfortable doing it. But this whole So my conflict alert number 3 is leaders don't need to be out there watching work to impact performance. Leader observations, they just don't provide much value to the organization. I've had this conversation twice in the last 2 weeks with organizations. One of them sent 14,000 data points out to data research miners. And what the data research mining came back with from their field observation program was you got a lot of clutter in your field observation program, who can't make hide nor hair out of what it tells us. But leaders coming back to that senior leadership forum and saying, here's what I learned by engaging with the workforce, can institute change immediately. And when people see change, they start to do something about it. But you don't have to watch work to do that. So I've got a breakout session. It's a 2-part breakout on how do we give some of the leaders tools. This one's called deviation analysis. How do we use that to improve the performance of the organization? How do you create a safety culture, develop a safety culture instead of demand one? How do you develop psychological safety instead of demand it? And so deviation analysis is a tool that leaders can use that looks a lot of like things that used to be called accountability models. But if you call it an accountability model, what do people think you're trying to do to them? And if you call it a culpability model, really what do people think you're trying to do to them? But by understanding the attributes of how to answer the questions of the flow chart of deviation analysis, you actually create the process, being good at understanding how people succeed and fail. Then you can say, okay, human resources, here's where we fall. Now, what do we do about that? And so deviation analysis, and we actually have an online course in Fit Online called Deviation Analysis. It can be done as self-paced, but we're going to be teaching this as a 2-part breakout session on how to do it. We're going to give you the process guide so that you can take it home and either teach it or show it. That's one of the breakouts that we're going to be doing. But deviation analysis is a tool that is both science-based and method-based. It's a process for leaders to use, and anybody can use it. And the cool thing is that it's a step-by-step process that if you use it, no matter who's using it, they wind up in the same place. They may argue about liking to wind up there, but they will wind up in the same place. And there's people on this call. There's going to be people at the co-hall that will talk about how deviation analysis took their leaders on a journey that now is driving completely different discussions about errors, violations, and deviations. And then the keynote that I'll be doing on Wednesday kind of brings this together and talks about how you can develop psychological safety instead of just demanding it. I hate to almost say that psychological safety may be the next shiny object, but I've been doing this 30 years and I've seen a lot of things with a lot of great names come and go and a lot of great books get written. This isn't to diminish those ideas. It's to understand that the concepts that we do, moving beyond empowering to enabling people, create all of these elements of just culture, of safety culture, of psychological safety, of resilience. And all of these things sound familiar. Those, plug any of them in here for psychological safety, and what the hot concepts done when they are used and empower and enable the workforce from the seniorest of leaders all the way to the floor. What those things do is they enable that outcome of safety culture, of psychological safety, of a resilient organization, of a highly reliable organization. Those are outcomes, folks. This is about the process for development. So I'm going to be talking about that in my keynote. Be started off with a little bit about, fearless organization and what that is, the types of categories of psychological safety that Amy Edmondson has written a fabulous book on. And when you start dissecting that, all of that stuff is about the elements that we then to know need to go do. And it's about how do we do those things? And that's how you develop psychological safety instead of just demanding it. One of the things that is important to that is that we don't just empower people. You know, we spent the late 90s, early 2000s saying, we're going to empower our people. But there's a difference between empowering people and enabling people. Folks, our job in whatever it is we touch in our world of trying to get organizations to learn, we have to enable the outcomes. We can't just empower the outcomes. So we talk about who gets to define unsure in your organization. If it's the worker, you can empower them to stop till the cows come home. But they're not going to have the ability. It's kind of like, and I tell this story a lot, it's kind of like that old Ron White joke. They said I had the right to remain silent, but I didn't have the ability. So you can't just empower people to do things. You have to ensure they have the individual capabilities to match the task demands and all of the tools that they need to be successful. That's enabling. So again, we go back to conflict number one. When you take the tools away from the people, you're taking away the very enabler that allow them to be successful in the absence of your great and perfect system. So since we know we don't have great and perfect systems, even though we want to create them, you better create better enablers for those folks. And part of that is turning a leader reaction into a leader response. So if you don't teach leaders how to get out of autopilot, so now we're into teaching leaders about system one and system two, and how that doesn't just apply to the worker out in the field, but how it applies to the decision that they make, how it applies to their response when someone approaches them. How do I turn my reaction into a response? How do I learn to push my pause button long enough to get that system one engaged into system two, system one reaction into system two response? You get leaders using those elements, learning how to turn their reaction into a response, and you've got them. We have to pay attention to these socio-technical attributes. Got to pay attention to the mental models. I was talking to Tony Machera last year. We just don't hear people say, "Oh, I don't believe in all that warm, fuzzy stuff anymore." We just don't hear that, because it's about the science and the socio-technical aspects of the performance, as opposed to let's all get together and hug. That's not what personality diversity in a learning organization is about. It's about incorporating all of these attributes to enable the organization to be better than they were when they learned it. Because in the end, if you can get leaders to use models, processes, and tools, and I see some people on this call that can testify to this. If you can get a leader to use a pocket guide to walk out during their engagement and read out of their pocket guide that people know they're in rule-based performance mode, the workers will then use a pocket guide to reduce their probability for error. If the leaders go out there and try and talk off the top of their head, they'll say something dumb. They're not using the models, processes, and tools. All it takes is 2 or 3 leaders. I just saw Tim Richards smile at that. All it takes is 2 or 3 leaders to say something dumb, and the next thing you know, people are going, "Oh, well, that shiny object is gone. I was here when you got here, I'll be here when you're gone." And they're going to wait it out. But if leaders use models, processes, and tools, the workers will too. And oh, by the way, if a leader uses something as simple as a pocket guide, the worker will use something as simple as a procedure. Go figure. So it's all about understanding, not just telling people their behaviors will be watched and modeled, but giving them the behaviors that can be modeled through the use of the essential leadership cycle, through the use of deviation analysis, through the use of understanding that their knowledge, language, and behaviors matter. If you want to start listening to the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast, I'll just leave this on there for a minute. I probably interviewed 60 leaders from around the world on how the Essential Leadership Cycle can be used to help manage all of these task-based systems you've got going on out there. It's a pretty effective way to get somebody from outside to talk to your leaders about short subjects. So you can type Essential Leadership Cycle podcast in any search engine, and it comes up. And if anybody wants to come on, let me know. So through the days of the Community of Human Organizational Learning Conference. Ray and Tim and some folks from S&B Construction are also going to be doing let's look at two different organizations that we've worked with, one that's been on the journey for 8 years and one that's been on the journey for 2, and let them talk to you about what that journey looks like and what's worked and not worked, and how learning from one of them sped up the learning for the other. And so I really do encourage people to attend that session that's going to be held by S&B Construction and PPG are the two organizations. And Tim Richards is on this call. He's going to be one of the folks that's doing that. I encourage people to go in and see, here's what that spectrum looks like. So you don't have to go out and be a pioneer. You can learn what the pioneers did. You can learn what the settlers did. You can learn how the residents need to improve things to be better. But I'm going to challenge you. Is there something in holistic HOP that won't enable psychological safety? When you describe HOP, this is it. Another conflict alert. We've got this thing on our little table cover that says HOP done right. Well, number one, that's because we've been doing it 30 years. But number two, if HOP is done right, it's done holistically. You educate people, then you integrate the concepts in the day-to-day workflow, and that creates sustainability in the organization. So when that leader rotates out and rotates to somebody else, part of that leader onboarding is to help them understand what they need to do and say and be as a new leader to ensure that HOP is the sustainable enabler for all these things that you've got going on, whether it's operational excellence or psychological safety or safety culture or just safety or whatever those things are. The integration piece becomes part of creating sustainability. And I would challenge you, find something in this holistic HOP that you don't need to create psychological safety. But we know how to do all of those things. And by we, I'm not talking about we just fit, we collectively. The community of human and organizational learning have 30 years of doing that. So this psychological safety needs to be developed, not demanded. Means we need to learn how to tell the stories, not about outcomes, but about processes. I actually become emotional when I see somebody post a video of a safety incident online and it's catastrophic for that worker. I get emotional just talking about it. And how somebody posts it and then says, well, there you have it, folks. No, there you don't have it. There you have a family that's without their father, their patriarch or their matriarch. There you have a coach that isn't there for their team anymore. There you have a pastor that's not there for their church anymore. That's what you have. Don't approach this as a program. Everybody that I know that does this well, and I see some of you on this call, I can't even call out each of you individually. It is a passion for you, not a program. And that's when you turn these things into the hows to make it happen. You have to do these things. In order to do them well, you have to take into account the personalities of the people that you're dealing with. You just have to. I mean, before advanced error reduction organizations a few years ago, it was treated like the shiny object. But now we understand, if you don't understand that part, you're only doing partial HOP. You're only getting part of the way to psychological safety. If I don't know what you need to be psychologically safe, what your personality needs, I ain't doing it right. So we now have to start incorporating those elements. And then we have to understand that learning doesn't happen until language changes, until behaviors change in the organization. And that's especially the leader behaviors. So this whole thing about let's get that lesson learned out within a week. I need to see that lessons learned out there. The whole organization now thinks the organization's learned the lesson. I don't need to do anything different because you already learned it. And it's not just that you put the lesson learned out there, it's that people actually think you learned the lesson. So how do we adjust the way we talk about things to be more in tune with the psychological safety attributes of learning? How do we get the leader knowledge, language, and behaviors that prove that we have learned instead of telling people that we have learned Therefore, I don't need to do anything different. So again, our sessions, Monday, we're doing this 4-hour pre-workshop, the impact of personalities on performance. Tuesday, we're doing the 2-part breakout session. Wednesday, we're doing the general session. And I forgot to put on here the session that Ray and Tim and Steve and Jeff are doing. But maybe one of you guys knows when that is. But that one's important because that's the practical application. And then I'll have copies of my book, Understanding Mental Models. Those will be available for both purchasing and giveaways. So I do want to open it up for any questions you may have. I also want to open up, we have this online portal called Fit Online, and we probably have 200 pieces of free content in Fit Online. We have links to our YouTube channel. We have, you can go see my speech from Cohol last year on Fit Online. Because they were very nice and gave us the opportunity to share that with other people. But I encourage you to join Fit Online. And if you do join it and you see a paid course that you would like, if you email myself or Ray, we'll gift you that course. We don't want you to have to wait to the Community of Human Organizational Learning presentations to get all that. So I want to encourage you to join that for free. It is free. And there's all kinds of things on there like Robservations. Don't blame me. They made me call them that are ways that in 2 to 5 minutes, people can understand the concepts. All those things are free. But once again, I appreciate the opportunity that the Community of Human Organizational Learning provides us to teach you what we've learned over the years and give you some steps forward. So no one is starting at ground zero, my favorite nuclear term. In human organizational performance. You are starting where the settlers and the residents have already gotten you there. You're moving into the condo that has the sewage and the septic and the lake and the pond that you want, so that you can now start working on the details for your organization. And all of that is out there for you if you take the time to look for it and look at it. So I just want to thank you again. I'll open it up to any questions. I don't know if some came in. I'm about half blind, so if I lean in to see if there's questions, it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, Rob, there are a few things in there that I'll highlight, and thank you very much for the mental images of the pioneers and the sewage at the condos. But those are great metaphors that I really appreciate about, like, maybe it's not you. Often we make the mistakes, in organizations, I've done it, of I need to invent something versus I'm going to leverage a body of knowledge and expertise that somebody has already developed that's totally there for me. So I love those two metaphors. Thanks for that. Ray and Jessica both texted that the deploying HOP and the real world session is on Wednesday, the 14th from 3:30 to 4:30 for those of you who are at the conference, who are already registered. There's a chat in the chat box. Elliot shared just a good short story about asking questions binary versus in context. And Elliot, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and tell that story real quickly. I really appreciated it, but it was just about how you framed the question and the difference in both the quality, and I'm paraphrasing Elliot, sorry, the quality of the answers, but also the impact that it had on culture, on psychological safety, on all that. So it was a great story. And Elliot, thank you for sharing that. And there was a question also, Rob, about the TED questions and how you ask them. Is there a sequence or a focus of those questions that matters with different personality types?
Well, yeah,
Or is it pretty much the same?
The kind of cool thing about TED's questions is the answers in the acronym. So 4 Ds, you can jumble those all up. I always, and then we started looking and saying, well, hold on a minute. Those 4 Ds, the direction matters, but they're all Ds. But the TED's questions, we want to ask them in that order. Tell me, explain to me, describe to me, show me. And what that does is it allows people that are how people to explain their hows. The explanation allows people that are what people to explain how they got there. The describe to me helps the who people understand here's the involvement of the people in the process. And the show me allows those people that are visual or those people that are relators to be able to connect the dots. So while they're not direct, each of those questions then draws something out of each of the different dominant personality types. And so what we've discovered is that using those questions in kind of a flow, let's say, instead of saying, why did you do something? Say, tell me what happened and how it happened. Explain how this came about. Describe the conditions under which this happened. Show me what went wrong. You're going to get the why without blaming people by asking them, why did you do that? So those questions are enablers to better information, as opposed to driving people back into the why did you do that? So instead of telling people, ask better questions, here are the questions that you can ask. And then when they start getting good at it, they start framing those questions a little bit differently. The tell me can be about, tell me about a time that a leader showed you that safety is number one. Explain to me how your crew impacts the customer, and that value of customer service is enabled in your crew. Describe to me the process of making sure that we know something's dumb, different, difficult, or dangerous. So once people get used to asking them, they're not asking why questions at all anymore. They're framing things in the TEDs, and that you just get such rich information. Thank you for that question.
Awesome, thank you. And one more question from me while I wait to see, so another chat in the chat box. I'll segue to that one first from Tim. We find more information using TEDs compared to past interactions. We tend to find other opportunities for improvement not related to the focus of the initial interaction. Super interesting one comment there.
And that's the design, right, Tim?
Yeah.
That was the, originally it was hey, trust us, these are going to work really good. And then organizations went out there and started using it. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Where has this been? And Tim, I see
it's
you're
a great aha moment for our leaders. When they use that, it's a great.
Yeah.
And watch this. It's an aha moment because they created it. It's not Tim telling them what they should know. It's him going out and creating it by a process that we know will create those things. You can't screw this up. So that I appreciate you doing that, Tim. That's a good testimony to when they create their own aha moments, you can't take it away from them. And we're just giving them the process for the creation of those aha moments. Great.
Rob, do you have like 2 more minutes? Because I have a question, and we'll see
I
if
have
any
as
other
much time as you guys need.
Oh, cool. Because my question, so I teach a bunch on leadership, and there's, so different things about being a courageous leader, and different elements of it. And one thing that occurs to me as I'm hearing you is this might not be easy. Like a lot of the things you talked about might not be easy. These are skills that we have to develop and work on, right? So meaning if I start thinking about what you've shared with us and I'm going to apply it, maybe it doesn't come naturally right away, or there are different elements that I need to really focus on to develop the skills of paying attention to people's personality types and how they show up in different roles. Is that a fair hypothesis?
It is, but we tend to label something as difficult if the right tools are given. So remember I said on that task-based system, people need to be aware of and manage their personality. Well, we give them the personality tendency management tools. So I'll give an example. Rick Foote, when he goes in to do a major incident analysis with a company, he's one of the best in the world at it. He has everybody do their e-colors that's on the team. Because if he sends somebody out to ask questions and they're a what person, all their questions are going to be what questions, and they're going to be deviating out into that what world. But I need you asking a how question. So how do I frame that in that piece? So what we've discovered along the way is it's not nearly as difficult, but if you don't mind, because I don't mind a little conflict, that
All good.
courageous leadership piece, right?
Yeah.
Well, what if one of the major personality types has no courage at all? If I tell them they need to be courageous, it looks overwhelming. Courage is in their potential limiters. But if I teach them intentionality, I'm teaching them the exact same thing. But here's your tool for managing intentionality that creates what we would call courageousness. But it's created as a process by teaching them how to manage their potential limiters that courage wouldn't have done. So
yeah, I love that.
those
Because it
words,
takes it to a meaningful level.
it does, and it's meaningful to them.
Yeah.
And once it's meaningful to them, that whole Sidney Decker quote that I use that he and I, if you want to shift somebody's paradigm, you got to give them a paradigm more powerful than the one you're asking them to leave. That's our job, not their job. So yeah, I mean, people, when we do team meetings of any kind of team, whether it's a learning team or whatever, we have people do their e-colors so we can have a discussion of our strengths and potential limiters. It takes a half an hour in team development to then understand that that person sitting right there, I may have to drag things out of them, but I still want their diversity and inclusive input. So that inclusion becomes my responsibility. Putting them in the room, that was just diversity. Now it's my job to be inclusive. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So while I'm just monitoring real quick for any additional questions or comments, and you got a lot of positive feedback in there, Rob. So thanks for that. Oh, there goes Elliot. You're unmuted. Elliot, what do you think?
Yeah, hey, I was just gonna kind of make a comment and ask Rob, for some insight. We've, been on the journey for a few years now, both with HOP and psychological safety, and the definition, I guess, around psychological safety, or at least the quote from Amy Edmondson, is creating an environment where people feel comfortable coming forward and, admitting mistakes or raising issues without a fear of being humiliated or embarrassed or punished. And I think sometimes it's easy to kind of say these things like, yeah, in theory, this is what this is what we want our actions to be as leaders. I think one of the difficult aspects of this is when someone does make a mistake and there's consequences associated with it, right? Getting over that reaction to respond in a way where, there's some disciplinary measures, right? And so I think with psychological safety, a lot of it being about trust. How do we get the leaders to trust the science and trust HOP? Because what I'll hear from folks at our sites is that, well, if we don't, let's say, discipline or do these things, then their fear is that maybe somebody else might get hurt in the future, right? So how do we get them to trust the science of how these things work and that it's a more sustainable approach?
Well, there's two parts to the answer to that question. And the first part is we focus on the last end of what Amy said instead of on the important part. Create an environment. Everything after that is whatever the shiny object name is. Create an environment for just culture. Create an environment for a good HOP. Create an environment for the leader's job is to create that environment. And in order to do that, I was just sharing with somebody here. I'm at General Mills right now, great hosts. And I was just sharing with one of their leaders, very often we try and get a group of leaders together to brainstorm how they're going to do that, but they're focused on the last end of what we're going to do, as opposed to having somebody from outside shift their paradigm and giving them some tools that will work for them. So the first time they use the tool, it works, and then they're hooked. And a lot of people say, well, I'm not going to spend $5,000 to do that. And, okay, well, 2 years from now, you're still going to be trying to hold people accountable. And and bringing somebody in with a bigger iron fist and saying, well, we have to hold people accountable or somebody else is going to get hurt. As opposed to saying, all right, well, let's get some kind of critical set of leaders to change their knowledge, language, and behaviors. So their demand for the environment creates that environment, and boom, 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 boom. And you can look across, and Tim can probably tell you about this, and some other folk can tell you, you can look across organizations that the leaders use the tools. They didn't just buy in, they were actively using the tools. So they were driving that change, as opposed to leaders that said, yeah, this is great stuff, but it's all about what the workers need to do. I love Tim just went like this. We checked that box. We've hopped, you know, we've got psychological safety, but people focus on really people bringing up things that would be dangerous or in conflict. But if you get people to bring up things that are good, if leaders' response to failure and success matters, they cut their teeth on responding to success, and the response to failure is easier. So giving them the tools and getting them to use it, as opposed to telling them from inside, hey, there's a science out there, you know, you should pay attention to this. I just haven't seen it work very well and very often. And we've got some brilliant people out there like yourself, Elliot, that are, y'all know this stuff, but you get frustrated because sometimes you can't get the leaders to listen and then do. And just so you know, that frustration is real. I remember when I was doing this from inside an organization, I was told by my senior leader, Rob, you're only ever 2 weeks smarter than the rest of the leadership team. Because you go out and learn these, you come back and tell us, that doesn't mean you're a smarter person. It just means you're 2 weeks smarter than us. So we get it. But the person that you bring in from outside, they're not 2 weeks smarter. They're 300 deployments smarter. They don't have a dog in the hunt that says, yeah, Elliot, let's agree to disagree. Bologna, I'm not agreeing to disagree with anybody on the things that are important. What I'll tell that leader is, we're not going to agree to disagree. You can go against the science if you want, but you're going to not get the outcomes that are needed. But, you know, you say that in an organization and the leaders go, well, we're not going to pay attention to Elliot or Tim or Dean because they just want us to go down this line because that's the camp they're in. So I hope I answered your question. I know it was a long answer to a simple question, but that's it. It really does take getting some kind of trusted outsider that they'll listen to for an hour. And then they'll commit to listening to for 30 minutes in a podcast. And then they'll commit to reading a book. And then they'll go, oh, all these things are saying the same thing. And I think that S&B, when they tell their story, they will tell the story of that leader in that session that Tim and Ray and S&B Construction are doing, because they had those leaders. I don't think they'll mind me telling you that. So that journey was a piece of it.
Yeah. Thanks. By the way, we do have a couple leaders that are hooked on your book, so making progress.
It's like hooked on phonics. The Evelyn Woodhead Sped Reading course. All right.
And
well, thank you again, Dean. Are there any other comments or questions?
no, just a lot of appreciative feedback, Rob. So, and here's more. So thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to share both now during the last hour and 11 minutes and also at the upcoming conference. And everybody who joined, thanks for taking the time to continue to just build your organizations, build the learning components of your organizations and make things better. And one more little bit of logistics. I put a link into the chat box for those of you who are attending the conference in Portsmouth, June 12th to the 16th. The window of opportunity to reserve rooms closes on May 19th. So the link for that reservation is in the chat box. And hope everybody enjoyed today. Rob, I certainly did. And have a great rest of your day, everybody.